Joyce, an Australian commentator who has recently worked on the SEA DPC Winter Tour along with other tournaments. You must have definitely known him in past work within the Dota scene such as ESO Mumbai. But from then on, he has obviously grown to becoming a quite a familiar figure within Southeast Asia. And so, Danog, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview with me. I really appreciate it. I just like to first start off with just a simple generic question. How are you doing right now?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much for asking, and thank you for the very nice and welcoming introduction as well. It really makes me feel perhaps a little bit more accomplished than I am, but always nice to hear a compliment.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Um, what does DPC season going into a break thus far? You know, with everybody gearing up for the spring tour. I'd like to know like how you've been preparing for this upcoming season.
Yeah, to be honest, I was kind of expecting the patch that came after the regional finals to probably be a bit bigger than it was. So, after the regional finals took place, I actually took like a very small break from casting, not really wanting to burn out perhaps, and then looking to really launch into the new patch. But honestly, it looks pretty similar across the board. I often see, when what I picture as a big patch is something where either the economy changes, the map changes, or there's like a new objective added to the map. And none of those things happened. It was just like hero changes and a couple of items added on. So I was a little disappointed with that, but you still need to understand the new meta. So obviously, I've been casting a bunch of BTS Pro series. I've done some other tournaments like Oceanic Esports, some community gaming, and of course, I was watching the Gamers Galaxy tournament as well in preparation for the upcoming DPC season.
You mentioned like obviously you mentioned your work within the casting side, but has there been any other things besides casting that you've been focusing on, like maybe reading or something like that? You know, other hobbies. Have you been focused more on like other hobbies within the break between the spring and the winter tour
So, not Dota related, or just things that maybe I could look to bring into my Dota related things?
outside of Dota?
I've been reading a little bit actually. I've started reading the Red Rising series of books, which is really cool. I think it's going to become a TV series soon, so definitely keep an eye out for that one. Other than that, just playing a little bit of games here and there. I played some Elden Ring, which was great, of course. Was playing a little bit of Final Fantasy 14 as well,
Mm-hmm.
and finally started going back to gym a little bit. I nearly passed out the first time that I went, so it's certainly a process getting back into some fitness.
Of course, I have obviously have well, you obviously have to take it one step at a time within that department. Um, but now talking more about Dota. I mean, obviously you mentioned it. Gamers Galaxy International Series to buy the big tournament that just wrapped up this week. One of SEA's own teams, or in other words, its biggest team, BOOM Esports took home that title, defeating Tundra Esports 3-2. I just like to just start off with a question regarding that sort of tournament. What were you feeling during the grand finals in which Boom had to outlast Tundra within those 5 games? Like, what was your mindset? Like, how did you react? You know, what was going through your head? Like within the series and also as it ended.
Mm-mm. I think obviously I was very hopeful for Boom with being able to take it out, being a big fan of Southeast Asian Dota. I've followed these players for a long, long time, so wanting the biggest success for them, particularly ones like FBZ who've stuck around the Boom organization for a really long time. There were some doubts starting to creep into my mind as well, right? They were
Mm-hmm.
down 2 games to 1 in that best of 5 grand final. They had just had to play a 3 game series against Nigma Galaxy just prior to that. And we've seen, when you're in this high pressure situation, especially when you've got players like Jackie who've never played on land before, it just means that maybe the pressure would get to them a little bit. They would get a little bit too tired, too fatigued, and their gameplay would suffer. But never really felt like it did. It felt like they were putting together some really strong performances all throughout. It felt like one of the times that they lost was because of Legion Commander being bugged in that mid lane. So, that was a little bit out of their control. And they addressed that later on throughout the series. So, yeah, I thought they did a great job.
Well, I guess it would be fair to say that you were surprised by Boom Esports eventually like taking home the entire trophy or the entire tournament.
Not surprised actually. I had them in my top three from the very beginning. I actually had them placing second behind Team Spirit, but that was before Spirit had announced that they were playing with Roger instead of Mira. So, they had to go through Team Spirit, obviously, on their way to getting to that grand finals. And perhaps if Spirit had their full roster, it would have been that way. But no, I certainly saw them going all the way until the final day. So I feel like Southeast Asian Dota, it's still kind of slept on outside of maybe Boom and T1, but there's a lot of skill there. And it's by far, in my opinion, the most entertaining region, at least in terms of like even matchups across the board.
Obviously, many people, fans, analysts, players are going to look back on this tournament and highlight Boom's sort of revitalization after being bumped down to the lower bracket. And so, what do you think was like the catalyst for Boom's turnaround within the playoffs? As they progress through the lower bracket. Like what has been the catalyst for their sudden turnaround?
I think they were talking about it whenever they got interviewed after a win, right? Like Scam, I believe, was the one that was saying it the most. He was like, look, this is all learning for us. We're learning in preparation for TI, which is the big event, of course, on the Dota calendar every single year. So even just learning within a tournament, at the end of the Southeast Asian regional finals as well, they took on T1 in the grand finals there, and they won that series 3-1, only dropping one game. But even the game that they lost, I believe it was FBZ that was interviewed after all of that, and he said, look, we probably should have won that game as well, but we just, pushed forward. We got a little bit too excited. We pushed our high ground advantage. And that's the sort of thing that I really feel like they called back to that during the Gamers Galaxy playoff stages, where they were able to take all the stuff that they've learned over the past few months while growing as a team and really apply that. I mean, Jackie's still a pretty new member of the roster as well, right? So it feels like he's starting to mesh a lot better with the rest of the team now.
Insofar as each player's contribution to the overall win in Dubai, who do you think has been like the MVP for this team in this tournament?
It's really hard to single out one person because I feel like they all shined in their own way, right? Like you have a look at a few of the stats across the board, and you'll see, like, for example, Scam is way ahead of every single other support in Gamers Galaxy in terms of how many D wards he's able to get throughout a game. So he just provides so much vision, and his shot calling is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Tim's just constant rotations, constant playmaking, being able to disable the right targets, and playing with Yopaj. Speaking of Yopaj, I mean, he's the one that gets all of the attention, of course, with crazy kills to deaths and making the big plays happen, but that doesn't come without the other players. And then people like Jackie, previously people put him in this box where he had like a very small hero pool, but he expanded on that and he did a great job. And FBZ, he was just solid all throughout. He didn't have any really poor performances. He was always performing at like a pretty high level all throughout. So yeah, across the board, it would be hard to say an MVP. If you put a gun to my head and say you have to choose, I would probably say it was a tie between Yopaj and Tims.
What about Mushi as the head coach? I mean, obviously, people are going to look at him as like one of the main reasons as to Boom Esports' turnaround or eventual victory in Dubai. Like, what do you think of? How do you think Mushi fared? Leading this team to victory.
Yeah, I think he brings a lot of professionalism, and he actually makes the players humble, and he makes them think exactly about every single little bit that they're doing. I know when he previously was working with TNC, for example, they had a few players trial out for boot camps, and one of the big questions that was asked when they were watching back replays was, what are you actually thinking about here, or are you just playing on autopilot? And it's just about breaking down the game into its separate stages and making the players think actually about what they're looking to do rather than just playing on instinct. And so I feel like he's really added that element to their game so that if something goes wrong, they're not just panicking and saying, well, this isn't what I'd prepared for. They're able to think on their feet and adjust their gameplay. And I feel like that's something that Boom has started to do a lot better.
I guess by the way you describe Mushi's coaching style, I guess it's like a sort of hands-off approach, in making the players think, how to resolve certain situations within the game. Like it's more hands-off. Has that been like a main difference between the rest of SEA as far as you have seen throughout the season?
Mm. I think it's more now at the stages of being hands off, but more towards the start, he was still very hands on in being able to say, like, look, I mean, let's be honest, Mushi probably from since Dota 2 began, other than maybe Ice Ice Ice, he's like the most successful person ever to play Dota from Southeast Asia, unless we're counting Anna, but he's Australia, so doesn't exactly count 100%. But he knows what it takes to win. He knows the mentality that's needed, and he wanted to just instill that into the players. And you certainly do see like an attitude shift, for example, in some of these players where they're able to take on his teachings and actually listen without having an ego, because he is this. I mean, everyone calls Yopaj the idol, but Mushi is the idol for a lot of these other players as well, right?
Mhm.
So they actually do respect his opinion and
Mhm.
want to follow that. And clearly, for Boom at least, it's working.
Within like Boom's victory of, well, many people have seen like Boom's victory in Dubai as sort of like validation of SEA, being one of the top dogs within competitive Dota. Um, what do you think? Like, does Boom's win in Dubai like sort of validates SEA's emergence within the international scene um at this current time?
I would say so. I would pick Boom as being one of the top 3 to 5 teams in the world right now. Maybe only behind like LGD, Liquid are certainly up there as well. But Boom are certainly very much in the mix across the board. So, I mean, when it came to the playoffs at Gamers Galaxy, it was literally Boom against the rest of Europe that was there. Every other team from Southeast Asia and North America had been knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, China didn't have a representative there. I thought that would have been really cool to see. And even Virtus Pro, for all the stuff that's going on with them, they're a very solid team. So it was a shame that we couldn't see them perform there. But yeah, I certainly do feel like even though time zones play a factor as to why some people might not watch as much of Southeast Asian and Chinese Dota as they probably should, but people now I feel are going to be paying a whole lot more attention to it.
You kind of touched upon like China's absence within this tournament. Um, there's always going to be like sort of many questions regarding like how Boom would have fared had a team from China had participated in this tournament, and so like I understand that we're kind of like going into like I don't
A
know.
hypothetical, like
Yes,
what if
yes,
yeah.
a hypothetical like we're part sort of hypothesizing like how these teams would have fared, and so how would you think like would Boom's result remain the same had like China or a representative from China participated in this event?
Hmm. I think at least in terms of knowing what to expect, Boom still would have done a very good job, because I feel like that's the one of the reasons why Southeast Asia has grown and improved quite a lot within the past few years, is because they're not being completely, I guess, insular is the right word, where they're just playing within themselves. They're also branching out and scrimming against a lot of these top Chinese teams. And I think they've said it publicly. Boom are saying like, oh yeah, we're like, if a scrim is a best of two, they're one-wanting a lot of the top Chinese teams, right? So they certainly would have still been up there amongst the top contenders, but anything can happen on the international stage, and when it really matters outside of a scrim. So I mean, they would have potentially still had that edge over some of the European teams that don't have the chance to scrim. against SEA and China, but yeah, it would have still been really close. It went to 5 games, the grand final after all, right? So it's not like it was a complete walkover.
Yeah, and with this tournament concluding now, everybody's attention will now go into the spring tour, aka the second season, within this DPC. And we know that Dota is a sort of like volatile thing for teams. You know, it's kind of hard to for a given team to stay on top, save for a few of them throughout its history. And so how do you think like Boom, like can Boom maintain its top form for this spring tour?
I think so. I think within Southeast Asia now, well, I was about to say there's a pretty clear top two. I would put Boom pretty comfortably at one. T1 previously, I would have put comfortably in position two, but they've been playing a lot of these smaller online third-party tournaments where they've been suffering some surprising losses, like not doing quite as well as they might have expected. I think in the recent BTS Pro Series, for example, they finished either fourth or third, and so I'm sure they would be looking to have won that entire tournament as well. So I really feel like it can go any way. Fnatic, I still feel like, is a strong team, even though they didn't show it necessarily at Gamers Galaxy. SMG, they've just had Ninja Boogie join as the new position 5, so maybe that adds a new dynamic. And then you've even got some of the teams coming up from the Division 2 as well. So interested to see how they're able to compete.
Yes, indeed, and it'll be a very interesting sort of competition in the future. Um, talking about the rest of the teams within the SEA, or in other words, like giving or talking about the scene in general. Um, as of right now, in your opinion, where does SEA rank compared to the rest of the regions in the world? Like you already touched upon it in the beginning of the interview, and so I just like to know. I just like you to elaborate more on that front.
I think we need to get into a few more specifics for me to be able to answer that question, right? Because it's like, is the top of C the same as the top of other regions? Is a very different question as to is all of Division 1 the same? And that's a very different question to is all of Division 2 the same? Because, for example, I think SEA Division 2 is the strongest from every single region. It feels like there's a very, very similar level of play, and that results in the most entertaining games. And I think actually across the board, Southeast Asian Division 2 is by far the most viewed from every single region. So that's a big credit to that. I think at the very top as well, Southeast Asia is certainly up there on the global stage. Let's say Boom and T1. The area that I think might be lacking a little bit that pushes SEA to be like, maybe the third or fourth strongest region is that there is that period where like the teams from third until eighth, let's say, just don't seem to have that X factor, that extra little bit that they need to transition into playing international competitions. So I'm keen to see if some of the lessons that Boom and T1 have clearly learned are starting to rub off on those other teams. Because, of course, I would love to see as many Southeast Asian teams succeeding on the global stage as possible.
Is it with like you mentioned like Boom and T1 being like with the major teams within the region, like do you think like there are other teams that have the potential to overtake the top the upper brass of the region, like teams like SMG, the Creation, Neon, all of those, Fnatic? Do you think any of those teams have the potential to overtake those major two teams?
From what I've seen so far, not really. I think there is a pretty clear top two, at least in my eyes. Oh, sorry, at least in my eyes. But they've certainly got the capability for it, right? Like, honestly, one of the teams in Division 2 at the moment, Team Orca, is very strong. And they only just missed out by tiebreakers of being in Division 1 this season. And just with how even it is across the board, they're not even guaranteed of being top 2 this season because they have to come up against, TNC and Talon and Lilgun and all these other really strong SEA Division 2 teams. So I'm keen to see what they're able to do. Even though I wasn't really a big fan of them towards the end of the first tour, the winter tour.
Mm-hmm.
Execration, I feel, with some of their roster changes, are a much stronger team right now. Like they've brought back Palos, who obviously got them a lot of success. They've also brought in Tino and Shanks, and I think Shanks is the next big position for in the entire Southeast Asian region. Like he is the next Tims in my eyes. So I'm keen to see what he's able to do with that roster, and I think they could even go as high as top 3.
Yeah, some strong words, but we'll obviously take or pay closer attention to those teams. I want to touch upon those two teams, or I want to touch upon those who were just promoted into Division One, Polaris, Enigma Galaxy, SEA. Do you think they can like stay in the top flight for in Division One? With it already being as tough as it is, within the competitive scene.
I think one of them can. I think it's just so close between 3rd and 8th in this region that it's going to be someone, unfortunately, that ends up missing out. It was the same deal last in the winter tour with Motivate Trust, right? Just being able to fall a little bit short. But I wish we saw the entire Enigma Galaxy SEA at Gamers Galaxy, because unfortunately, Alacrity wasn't able to be there. They used Weeha instead, and they just didn't play like the Enigma Galaxy C that I was used to seeing. It just felt like they'd lost that little bit of uniqueness to themselves. So I think they've still got a shot. The one team, unfortunately, because I really like them, but I'm worried a little bit for Neon and their prospects moving forward. I feel like they've gone a similar sort of strategy to what TNC did in the Winter Tour, where they brought on a lot of young players and they tried to build around that with a couple of veterans. And I feel like, obviously, for TNC, didn't work out that well towards the start of the tour. Towards the end, they were looking a lot stronger, but at the very beginning, they were quite shaky. And I feel like there are some very strong teams within the Southeast Asian region, so I feel like Neon might be one of those teams that goes down.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I want to take the direction slightly off from the SADPC and now into your sort of improvement. Obviously, you started off as I don't want to say I don't want to say it, but relative nobody. But then you have thus progressed into being one of the most recognizable people within the SEA DPC scene. You've shown yourself in the broadcast. Being a commentator, analyst, stuff of that nature. And so, from the end of last season up until now, how have you viewed your personal progression as a commentator / caster?
I feel like it's been good. I mean, you say I'm a relative nobody, and honestly, within the Southeast Asian region, that's not as much the case anymore. But you see me put on any broadcast that's not SEA, and people are like, "Who the hell is this guy?" Because, like I was saying before, it's hard for NA and European people to watch these Southeast Asian and Chinese broadcasts.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of my improvement, I've been looking at a lot of little things, I suppose. Comparing myself with those casters that I view myself as fitting into a similar niche to, as well as seeking feedback in particular from a lot of the people that I respect and wanting to upgrade in that aspect. Even if it's doing the remote stuff, I didn't used to have this high-tech microphone, for example. I just used to use some little USB or a headset mic, and it felt like my quality suffered a little bit because of that. But obviously, putting a little bit more emphasis into the end product and wanting to be more polished and more well-rounded, I feel like I've made a decent amount of growth. So I'm just looking to continue doing that. Maybe the next step would be, reaching out more to pro players and wanting to hear a little bit more about their insight into things. Because I always feel, I don't know if it's me being shy or whatever you want to call it, but I always feel like I don't want to bother them because they've obviously got a lot on their plate already. And why help me? Like, who am I? I still kind of view myself as a bit of a nobody as well. So maybe just having the courage to go for that would be the next step for myself.
Yeah, I have the same sort of like internal conundrums whenever I do like my interview requests, or whenever like I ask somebody like, "Hey, do you want to do an interview?" And yeah, like that's sort of Like I sort of have those feelings of I don't want to bother them, but I really want to like talk to them. But yeah, like
Mm.
I understand what you mean. Um, you mentioned like listening or hearing or watching casters, you know, in order to improve your own self. And so, can I like to ask like who exactly have you been keeping an eye on or watching, you know, within like Dota 2?
I think for different aspects, right, you can look to different people. So, and a big part of it also depends on the dynamic that you've got with your co-caster. So my main play-by-play caster right now is Ares, that I do a lot of stuff with. But for example, just looking at the banter and stuff that happens between Sunsfan and Cinderin, for example. So I really take notes from Cinderin as to like how to respond, how to keep the joke going while not getting too far away from the action.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of just being able to be really concise and on point with a lot of the analysis that you're giving, I look to Fogged. You know, he's someone that I've looked up to for quite some time as well. And then in terms of just being someone that's very easy to listen to, that's very relatable, that might not be talking about Dota at like this level that you need to be Immortal Plus to understand,
Mm-hmm.
I look to someone like Trent because he's very relatable. He's really good at being able to translate high concepts into something that is very easily digestible and understandable. So they'd probably be my big three.
Have you received any feedback from any of those people that you mentioned?
Little bits and pieces. Like I try to not be too formal about anything because again, like I don't want to take up their time, blah 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 blah. I know there are a lot of casters, for example, that do give up their time in actively wanting to do that sort of thing. So, you know, Cap does it with play-by-play casters, for example. I know back when he was more actively casting, Blitz liked to do that as well. Basically said, look, if you have any questions for me, just look to reach out and I'll be sure to help. But yeah, I kind of like what you were saying before with being shy. Like I know all the people that I've mentioned on varying levels. Like I've met Cinderin a couple of times, and I go to his stream pretty frequently. I've played games with Fogged, and you know I've a pretty decent relationship with Trent, for example. But I don't like to be. I never want to be seen as that person that leverages my friendship because I want something, you know? And it's that fine line to tread where obviously you want to help out your friends and your acquaintances, but I don't want to feel like I'm just this leech basically
Mm-hmm.
taking something from them and not giving anything in return. So I don't know. That's just how I feel. Maybe it's a bit of insecurity creeping in.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned or back in an interview you did in 2019 like with esports 7 you described your commentary or commentating as a sort of support mentality style. um from then on, how do you think that sort of aspect has evolved um since that point on, you know, from late 2019 through the pandemic, through, you know, doing division 2 and then until now?
I still feel like the support mentality is something that I lean into a little bit, especially because at Pro Dota, information is everything. You know, these teams are so evenly matched in terms of mechanical skills that yes, you can point out this tiny little thing that made the difference in a team fight, but it's more often about like the 30 seconds to 1 minute before the team fight. You know, what happens? Do they push out the lanes? Do they make sure they're showing themselves in this area on the map? Did someone smoke on their own and place this super deep ward? And that's the sort of mentality that I like to lean into a little bit more. So I feel like, yeah, my casts are still quite or heavily leaning towards that. But a lot of the work that I have done as well is some of the stuff that I might not be as familiar with, like, you know, uh, position one v position one core to core matchups, like which is stronger and why, and what timings can they look to abuse. Same sort of thing with the mid lane, and that sort of stuff as well. So, yeah, certainly working on stuff that's outside of my regular comfort zone as well.
Yeah, and from the end of last season, or in other words, from last season until now, you have started gaining ground on becoming more pronounced or more familiar with the SEA fan base? You started off working Division 2, only Division 2 from 2021, and then for the start of this season, you were called up into to work on Division 1 as well. And so to go from there, from then to now, like when you received like the heads up that yes, you were going to work on Division 1, like how did you react? How were you feeling? It's within that juncture.
Obviously, it's a big relief, to be able to get that sort of call up. You feel grateful for all those sorts of opportunities, and it comes to a point, and this is something that I've talked with, for example, MLP and John about. There's only a certain point that you can get to by grinding online casts. You kind of need to level up in a different way. And the way that you do that is being able to go to a LAN or being able to go to a studio broadcast and have that experience of, how do I position myself on camera? What are my best angles? How do I talk to someone when I've got someone physically there next to me? Because a lot of the stuff, even though obviously the internet is pretty decent these days, and Aries and myself, we both live in the same city, even though we don't cast from the same location, you can often miss up on little things like small cues that basically say, I want to say something right now, so that you're not talking over each other. These are the sorts of things that you really start to be able to implement into your broadcasts if you're able to have that experience. So yeah, was very grateful to have that for the winter tour, and fingers crossed for stuff for the future as well.
Yeah, and another part to consider with you working in Division 1 is that you're actually working in a studio. So it's not like
Yep.
you've been. It's not like you've always been working remote. You've now started to talk with people. Work with people actually in studio. And so how has that been? To transition from going full remote to now being in person with your colleagues.
Honestly, I feel like it was pretty easy, at least with the people that I'd worked with in Nat and Cheapo and Gods. They're all friends of mine already, right? So it's not like this was some big shock to my system. It was very easy to be able to converse and, banter back and forth off a lot of these people. I think the real test really comes when, you're going to be in that situation with someone, let's say, for example, BSJ, that I've maybe had a couple of conversations with before, but I don't have that personal relationship there already. So it's just being able to adapt to that, that I think would probably be my next biggest challenge. But happy to take that challenge on.
So it's not been like very difficult for you. It was just like a seamless sort of thing.
For me personally, yeah. Just because when I was still even more of a relative nobody, here at the ESL Australia studios, we did like the national Dota competition. And that involved being at a studio, having production there, having someone standing next to me doing the broadcasts, having a panel sort of situation. And then at those same studios, they also did the ESL1 Thailand and ESL1 Germany broadcasts that happened in 2020, like during the height of the COVID pandemic. So I had a lot of experience being able to cover, not only local Dota, but pretty high to top tier Dota on a panel setup with, obviously having that connection with a lot of my peers as well. So I feel like I'm honestly most comfortable in a panel sort of environment. That feels like that's where I deliver my best results. But certainly casting as well. Still feel comfortable with it, but panel is where I really shine. So yeah, to answer your question, it was pretty easy, to be honest, to be able to transition into this environment in even though it was in America instead of in Australia, because I had those people that I already had these genuine personal relationships with, and it's something that I'd done before.
Directing the attention back to like the DPC, obviously I understand that this sort of competitive scene has been dominated, by teams within the actual region. I think teams based in Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, those sort of avenues, or those sort of countries in which the major core of Dota 2 within the region is based on, which leads to Australia. I mean, obviously, you based in Australia, you worked in Australia, you cover Dota from Australia, the same as your colleagues for the most part. There's I see that there's like that the broadcasting casters, commentators are predominantly Australian, but there's not been any Australian teams within
Yeah.
like SEA within the SEA region, and so like
Hmm.
what do you think is the reason for why we have not seen Australian teams, emerging within SEA?
Hmm. I think there's a number of factors, right? Like, um, towards the very start of Dota, there was, TI2 had a full or almost a full Australian team there as the representatives. Absolute Legends was their name, and then up until about TI6, teams like Can't Say Whips was there and making a lot of good results on the international stage. But in more recent times, years went by and we saw Valve, for example, give major qualifiers to regions like South America, and good on them. They've really improved their level of product up to a good stage where they deserve to be there on the global level, because you're going to have one of the teams representing in the top 8 at TI, which we've seen Beast Coast do a couple of times now. So great job for them. But for me, unless Australia had that dedicated pathway, even if it was for something even more minor, like back when the major minor system was happened, like one oceanic minor qualifier spot would have done wonders for the region to be able to get organizations on board, because the landscape here is very much dominated by League of Legends, and they're very I don't know what the right word is, but like they like to prevent any kind of opportunities for MOBAs that are not League of Legends, essentially. So a lot of the organizations have to sign contracts that say you will not also have a Dota team, basically. So that's one of the aspects. One of the other things is that the way that you get better is by playing against better people, and that's on the Singapore server. So most people would be playing on about 100 ping to be able to make that happen, unless you moved to Southeast Asia or maybe moved to Perth in Western Australia, where you might be playing on like 60 ping, which is doable and it's been done a couple of times, but just not with great success. Um, Another reason is population. Australia has about a quarter of the population of the Philippines, for example. And then the last was probably that in general, our quality of life is pretty good. You can go and get a job working at McDonald's and you can make more than you would probably make by being a Dota player, unless you're like a once in a generation talent like Ana, for example, or KP. So the risk to reward ratio is just so scary for a lot of these people. Whereas if you're a player from Vietnam, for example, where the cost of living is quite low, you can afford to go for that sort of chance, right? Because A, you're close to the server. B, you're constantly playing against a lot of these people. C, there's not this League of Legends domination over these regions, so that they're able to have organizations willing to invest. And also, if they succeed, they can provide really well for them and their family with opportunities that they wouldn't be able to get elsewhere.
And so with that said, like do you see a future in which we will see a an Australian team, fight amongst the best SEA teams, or
I
like
don't think so. I think that time is gone. We've had a lot of really talented players that just for whatever reason they never seem to be able to bring it all together and come together. So I think maybe there might be a player here and there that goes to Southeast Asia, for example, or China, and joins in onto one of these teams and finds a decent level of success. But I don't think a full Oz squad was going to happen. If it was, probably like 3 or 4 years ago was the time that breakout would have happened.
you mentioned like a sort of player that can emigrate to the bulk of, or emigrate to Southeast Asia from Australia. Do you have a player in mind in which people should take notice of, or can you think of one?
I can think of a few. It just comes down to their level of drive to want to do it. I think the three most talented people that haven't moved on with doing other things, like one of the really strong players had a stint for T1 called Zemistry, but now he's a doctor, right? So obviously you kind of have to weigh up: do you want to play Dota or do you want to be a doctor and make hundreds of thousands of dollars? Um, but people like Calvin, for example, he's very driven with Dota. He's close with a lot of the players within the Southeast Asian region. I think he's got a decent shot if he really wants to put his mind to it. someone like Lose Yourself as well, very talented player. It just comes down to, is he more focused on his university studies now, or is he still wanting to make that push to go pro? And then someone like Lord Boons, who's been in the scene for quite some time. He's been, I would say, probably the most successful homegrown talent that we still have. But he's moving on in life as well. He's got a family. He's got other commitments now, so the drive might not just be there to the same extent.
Right, right. Now, I'd like to just touch upon the newest patch that the game has just experienced. You've already gave your words, or you've already gave your perspective as to this sort of new patch 731, and so how has been what has been the difference in meta between this current patch that the players are going through and the previous one?
I think it's all just going to be based around the Aghanim shards, right? There are so many shards that now bring heroes online so much sooner, whether that be someone like Tiny with his Aghanim shard, um, Weaver, Chen. They're certainly heroes that are in the pool because of that. I think a big part of it is the jungle change as well. Jungle in general is slightly harder to kill. So someone like TA is seen as one of the most busted heroes in the entire patch because Psyblades is still doing pure damage. So a lot of the changes that made the jungle harder to kill don't really apply to her. And so she herself might not have changed all that much, but just relative to everyone else, she just goes way up in the pick order for what's required. But yeah, we got to see a TA nerf. We got to see a Kunkka nerf. We've got to see a Weaver nerf. Those are the three heroes that I just want to see out of the meta because they have been in there for a long time.
And it's with this patch that teams will play in the DPC for the spring tour, and so I'd like to just know. I mean, we're already a few days from the start of the tour, and so I'd just like to know your standings on the SEA Spring Tour. Who's gonna come in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and who will go down to Division 2?
You're getting me to rank every single one, huh?
Yeah,
Okay,
predictions.
so yeah, let's say Boom T1. That's an easy one too. 3 is kind of tough. I'm still going to say Fnatic as number 3, just because I feel like they're going to be able to, with their experience, abuse some of the inexperience from some of the newer and newer players. I'll say 4 is Execration, 5 SMG, 6 say Polaris, 7 Nigma-SEA, 8 Neon.
You're gonna lock them in. Yeah. You're gonna lock them in with confidence, with absolute confidence.
Not with confidence. Everything out of the top 2, I'm not that confident about, but that's what I'm gonna say for now. I could do Div 2 as well if you want.
Go for it. Go for it, by all means.
All right, let's have a look. We still have one spot left in Div 2, by the way, that still needs to be claimed, but Talon certainly look a whole lot better. I just want to say something about Talon as well, right? Like, it seems really odd to me that Talon, in their previous iteration, when they had Flyer, Gabby playing with them, they only played DPC. I'm sure they were scrimming as well, but they didn't play any third-party tournaments, and it showed. It felt like this was the team that hadn't really played too much together, and the chemistry wasn't quite there. They've slightly improved on that at the moment. They're playing like what's it called? Like the Covenant War or something like that. Some third-party tournament, but it's against like tier 3 and 4 Southeast Asian and Chinese teams, and they're just stomping almost every single game. And I'm not sure how much value you're actually going to get out of that. So the thing that I really want to see change for Talon is them playing more like legitimate matches against competitive opponents, because I feel like they could certainly be surprised once Division 2 does come around. But all right, so if I had to rank them, I'm still going to say Talon number 1. I got to support my boy KP.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, I'll say Team Orca. 3, Lil Gun. 4, TNC. 5, Motivate Trust. 6 chubby boys, 7 army geniuses, and 8th whoever's yet to qualify.
You're already disrespecting the default team. I see that.
They would have qualified by now if they were any good. No, I'm kidding. But it is very close. You know, I was kind of surprised that I was actually covering the grand finals yesterday with Aries for Division 1. Sorry, for the first spot. And I was really surprised that MY ended up losing 2-0 to Chubby Boys in the fashion that they did. I thought that MY was... Honestly, I kind of feel like MY is even a better team than Motivate Trust in a lot of ways, even though they are kind of like the B team for that the Thai organization. So I don't know. I would still say that they're up there, like Yangon Galacticos or another team that could very easily come through. Kobolds. There's a lot of teams really that are looking to compete at that level. So I'm keen to see it, and I'm lucky enough that Southeast Asia is, I believe, being played on the first day of the new DPC. Division 2, it's just going to be after China Division 2, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be exciting.
Right. It's going to be a very fierce dogfight for division or for a spot in Division 1, in which it will be equally as grueling, difficult, and exciting at that. Danog, I think that about wraps up all of my questions for this interview. Once again, I really appreciate you taking the time for speaking with me and giving your insight on SEA ahead of the spring tour. Do you have like any final words, final shout outs, acknowledgements that you want to give?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Acknowledgements to Beyond the Summit, of course. They've been really good to me over the years, giving me the opportunities that I've worked very hard for, and I'm sure they'll be able to put on another great tournament. Of course, shout out to my co-caster Aries. He's like a little brother, sometimes annoying, but you care about him. And of course, the entire Southeast Asian Dota scene. Thank you very much for being so passionate, and hopefully I can continue having your support moving forward, because first majors and then TI, that's the goal for me.
Of course, that is the goal for everyone else. But with you, I hope that you can make it into TI. With that said, though, I've been Pedro Romero. Once again, he has been Danog. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.